Welcome to At the Forefront of Food Allergies, Preventive Strategies to Improve Outcomes, presented by Partners for Advancing Clinical Education in collaboration with the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America and FAIR, Food Allergy Research and Education, broadcast in Immunology Live. This is the first session in a two-part series entitled Management of Food Allergies, Guideline-Based Prevention of Allergic and Anaphylactic Reactions. My name is Dr. Robert Wood, and I'm Professor of Pediatrics and International Health and Director of the Wood Division of Pediatric Allergy, Immunology, and Rheumatology at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. I'd now like to introduce my co-presenter, Dr. Edwin Kim, Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, Chapel Hill. Thank you, Ed, for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Before we get started, a reminder to visit the event resources section of the player located under the video box to download today's presentation slides, as well as some resources that you can share with your patients from the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America and FAIR. Now, let's get started. Dr. Kim has a role as consultant, advisor, and/or speaker for ALK, Allergenis, Bellhaven Biopharma, Genentech, Canota Health, Nutricia, Revolo, and Uco. He's on the Safety Review Committee for Allergy Therapeutics Limited. Dr. Wood, myself, has got research support from several companies, Aimmune, ALK, DBV, Novartis, and Ciolta. Our learning objectives for this morning are to recognize the limitations and challenges associated with traditional treatment approaches, including oral immunotherapy or OIT, for desensitization and improvement of tolerance to known food allergens. Secondly, to apply current evidence-based consensus recommendations for managing food allergies. And third, to describe current evidence supporting the efficacy and safety of emerging biologics that target the underlying pathophysiology of food allergies and common comorbidities. We're going to begin with a brief case to sort of set the stage for the rest of the discussion. Very typical presentation of a 4-year-old who shows up in your clinic for follow-up after allergic reaction when he accidentally ingested a product that may have contained peanut. His peanut allergy was initially diagnosed at the age of 10 months when he had his very first exposure to peanut that resulted only in facial hives. His diagnosis of peanut allergy was confirmed by skin and IgE testing. His avoidance had been successful until this past weekend when he ate a sugar cookie at a family gathering. He immediately complained of itching in the mouth, then progressed to diffuse hives, vomiting, and respiratory distress. Unfortunately, the family went to the picnic without any medications. They therefore called 911. He received epinephrine in the ambulance and again in the emergency room. Thankfully, he recovered quickly and we'll say, in quotes, without sequelae. I now want to turn the podium over to Dr. Kim, who's going to highlight some aspects related to the burden of living with food allergy. Edwin?
Thank you, Dr. Wood. So as Dr. Wood mentioned, we'll start by talking about really what is that burden of living with food allergy. And I think the best way to start is just to really appreciate how big of a problem is this? Do we really need a treatment? And I think this slide from FAIR really encompasses the story pretty well. So first of all, 32 million Americans are estimated to have food allergy. I mean, a tremendous number of patients that are out there that are that their lives are actually affected by food. And for a lot of the parents that are out there, the number in green really stands out. 1 in 13 children, which is estimated to account for 2 kids in every classroom in the United States may be dealing with some sort of food allergy. And for a lot of us, even in the food allergy world, the purple number is one that maybe surprised us, but 1 in 10 adults are also thought to still have a food allergy that affects their lives. So again, a tremendous number of patients out there. But really, the next slide kind of gets at one of the questions that comes up very frequently for us in the clinic of what's going on here? We don't remember this when we were younger. And this slide here really starts to bear that out. So the darker the color you see represents the higher prevalence of food allergy. And as you can see, even between 2009 to 2016, you see just a lot more darker states, just as showing you sort of the increase in just those 7 years of how much food allergy is out there. And myself being from the University of North Carolina, that first number really stands out for me of a 332% change, an increase in food allergy reported in North Carolina. So clearly there's something going on out there where there are far more patients who have food allergy that are really seeking some sort of management guidance. Now, it's not just having the food allergy, but what we have very much learned, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, is that avoiding the food is not the full story. There is a tremendous psychosocial burden that comes with food allergies. And this is actually significantly worsened by certain situations, such as having multiple food allergies, and then social isolation and some of the other aspects that comes with food allergy. So again, just getting at sort of not just the risk of allergic reactions, which of course is the main thing that we're worried about and trying to manage, but also trying to do what we can to alleviate the psychosocial burden that comes with food allergies. Now, what are the traditional management approaches that we have been using for food allergy? And so in the last few years, several of the large academic allergy societies have come up with guidelines to help providers to manage food allergy. And the most recent one came from the World Allergy Organization Journal that you see here. And this was a multidisciplinary task force of the WAO, and it was comprised of multiple specialties, which I think is very important for these guidelines. So adult and pediatric allergy was represented, but also primary care, dermatology, dietetics, psychology, education, food science, methodologists, as well as patient organizations. And that last one is really critical because, of course, the patients are the ones that are dealing with this, and to really understand their perspective in helping us to figure out what is the best way to manage food allergy is quite important. The recommendations from this guideline were divided into dietary as well as allergy and immunotherapy, and I'll go through those in 2 parts. So first, this slide here represents the dietary interventions, and the key one is going to be at the top, which suggests kind of what we would assume is common sense, but someone who has a documented food allergy should be avoiding that offending food. And what we know for these allergic reactions is it actually doesn't take much food. So even small, even trace amounts for some patients can be enough to trigger an allergic reaction. So when it comes to actually dealing with food allergy and managing it, really we're talking about strict avoidance in most cases. In the case of cow's milk formula, there's also sort of a discussion here that suggests that infants ages 0 to 1 diagnosed with cow's milk allergy who need a breast milk alternative, hypoallergenic, extensively hydrolyzed cow's milk formula or an amino acid-based formula could be appropriate here as well. Now, again, avoidance is easy for us to say, and one of the things that's hopefully helped our families with the avoidance as well as our patients are a couple of laws or acts that were passed. The first one is the Food Allergy Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004. And this is the act that states that the 8 major food allergens, so this is going to include milk, egg, wheat, soy, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. These 8 major food allergens must be listed clearly on food products. And on the right, you see an example of what this looks like. The language that is very clear contains milk or say contains egg. Most recently, just in January of 2023, the Food Allergy Safety, Treatment, Education, and Research, the FASTER Act, was passed. And what this did was add sesame to this list of 8 major food allergens that needs to be labeled. Unfortunately, even with these labeling laws, though, we have discovered, and many families and patients have shared with us, that avoidance is quite difficult. One of the simple things that was supposed to help us was labeling, but unfortunately, lots of food products actually also include voluntary labels, which complicate label reading. And the example on the right shows you made in a factory that uses nut ingredients, made in a plant, may contain traces. These type of voluntary language can complicate what the reading of labels and identifying what foods may or may not be safe for patients. Also, as we mentioned earlier in speaking a little bit about the quality of life, we know that avoidance, unfortunately, also can have the unwanted side effects of isolation, creating fear. It restricts daily activities for some of these patients and families. And again, this poor quality of life that's been referred to. Compounding this problem, unfortunately, is that many food allergies can last many years, and some are even lifelong. So this problem that we see currently is something that for many patients won't go away and can really, really create a tremendous burden on these families. We also know, unfortunately, that avoidance is not foolproof. So even in the best families, in the best patients where they are reading every label as carefully as they can and doing everything they can to protect themselves, we unfortunately know that, that accidental ingestions and allergic reactions can occur. The NIH-sponsored Consortium for Food Allergy Research, COFAR, conducted an observational study looking at the risk of allergic reactions, the development of food allergy, but also the risk of allergic food reactions. And unfortunately, what they found was exactly this, that 72% of patients within this observational study experienced food allergy reactions. And then slightly more than half actually had more than one reaction during this period of time. These are patients that knew they were in a study being observed for this, and they still had difficulty with avoidance. We know that food allergy remains the most common cause of anaphylaxis that's actually seen in the emergency department. And then there's some other issues that come with avoidance. And one of them is that we know that although our allergy testing that we provide in clinic can give us a sense of a diagnosis, unfortunately at this point, it can't predict severity, or at least not accurately. So we can't tell that patient in front of us that that next allergic reaction may just simply be hives or something else. We also know that severity, unfortunately, can vary with subsequent exposures. So whereas that patient may tell you that the first 3 or 4 times, they broke out in a small rash, it seemed relatively mild. Unfortunately, we can't guarantee them that that next reaction couldn't be a bigger reaction. And then finally, we know that although fatalities are exquisitely rare, when they do happen, the majority of these fatalities are happening in patients that actually know that they have the allergy. So this is not the child who eats it for the first time necessarily and then has this life-ending event, but more people that maybe know and then had an accidental ingestion and perhaps were not prepared to treat it or had some comorbid disease or something else that's put them at higher risk, unfortunately. And so the next part of the guideline goes into allergen immunotherapy, which is exciting because even 3, 4, 5 years ago, this really wasn't something that was part of major guidelines, but something that we were hoping to be able to add to guidelines. So an active or a proactive form of treatment. So this task force recommends offering peanut oral immunotherapy with a high certainty of evidence under specialist supervision using standardized evidence-based protocols for using peanut products to treat patients' children ages 4 and older with IgE-mediated peanut allergy. There's also a suggestion of offering peanut epicutaneous immunotherapy with a licensed pharmaceutical product if it becomes available, and then possibly considering oral immunotherapy for other base foods as well, specifically hen's egg and cow's milk allergy. And so let's go a little bit into where these guidelines came from. So oral immunotherapy is proven to desensitize, at least when it comes to peanut. And here on this slide, what we see is the primary outcomes of the PALISADE study. And what you see, importantly, is in the middle 600 milligram, which was their primary outcome, you see a tremendous treatment effect. So the darker bar shows a near 70% success rate or responder rate on treatment versus less than 10% when it's on placebo in peanut allergic patients that are ages 4 to 17. Clearly showing there's a strong treatment effect, providing a level of desensitization or protection. Now, I do think that it's important to emphasize that at this stage, what we're seeing is a desensitization, so an increase of how much peanut it may take to trigger a reaction. But here, we're not talking about a cure. We're not talking about the ability to freely eat these foods, but more of an important protection against accidental small ingestions. Now, again, like I just mentioned, oral immunotherapy can be quite effective and is proven to desensitize. But what we have learned in the last few years as it's increased, there's the approval of the Palforzia product by the US FDA and Europe as well as office-based oral immunotherapy increasingly being offered. And with the number of patients increasing, what we have very quickly learned is OIT, while effective, can be very hard for patients. There is, of course, a well-known significant risk of allergic reactions and an increased risk of anaphylaxis, as well as the requirement of using epinephrine to treat allergic reactions while on OIT. And then the actual administration of oral immunotherapy can be burdensome. So it requires a daily dosing. And like I mentioned, it does not appear to be curative. So this is potentially a daily dosing for an extended, if not indefinite, period of time. We know that dosing needs to be restricted around exercise, as well as when a patient is ill. And thinking about very busy children who maybe are active in sports, or the younger children who are constantly getting sick while in school, this can be quite difficult. And then, at least with the FDA product, the build-up protocol requires many office visits, up to 10 to 11 office visits that are scheduled, as well as possibly unscheduled visits to the doctor's office if there happens to be allergic reactions or perhaps missed doses, which can be very difficult for certain families and patients to be able to do. And then finally, a very practical issue, but the taste and the smell and the texture of this peanut treatment can sometimes be very difficult for some patients to be able to deal with as well. And so there is an unmet need for patients who are maybe unwilling or unable because of side effects to actually do OIT. Now I'd like to hand it back to Dr. Wood to talk a little bit about new and emerging treatment options for the management of food allergies.
Thanks, Edwin. That's a great background. So I want to think of some key questions that we should be thinking about as we're talking about therapies for food allergy. So first, what do we want as doctors? More importantly, what do patients and families want? And then getting down to the kinds of things that Dr. Kim was just speaking about, what do the treatments really offer? Do they offer a just degree of protection? What is the duration of protection? Is it very food specific or more generalized? And how acceptable will it be long term? Is the risk benefit ratio acceptable for both the caretaker and the patient? And will the treatment be cost effective? So there are a number of approaches beyond those mentioned so far that are currently under study for the treatment of food allergy. And I want to divide them into those that are food specific and those that are food non-specific. And as we talk a little further, you'll see why this distinction is so important. So one of them is called epicutaneous immunotherapy, or EPIT, and this refers to using a Band-Aid sized patch that has been impregnated with a small amount of peanut protein, wearing a new patch each day, 24 hours a day, and showing in studies, especially of younger children, that there is a modest but meaningful degree of protection in a majority of patients that have been treated. The second is sublingual immunotherapy. Series of studies led by Dr. Kim have shown that SLIT, or sublingual immunotherapy, can be effective for peanut and other food allergies. And it may have advantages in that it is using a much lower dose than what's used in oral immunotherapy. And the lower dose is taking advantage of a rich immunologic environment in the sublingual space that seems to give more bang for the buck in terms of similar protection with lesser doses and therefore less risk of adverse reactions. There's a product called VLP, virus-like particle peanut, that is under investigation. There are peptide immunotherapies, and peptide refers to breaking a food allergen down into its individual peptide components, trying to keep those components that are most relevant to developing desensitization or tolerance, and removing the pieces of the protein that are most important for Ig binding, therefore hopefully reducing adverse reactions. There's a somewhat similar approach, but a little more crude, of chemically modifying the peanut protein in a way that, again, you would hopefully reduce reactions but still get benefit. And then another therapy that is under investigation is using IgG4 antibodies, which we all produce upon exposure to certain allergens. When we look at, say, oral immunotherapy studies, we see that the individual patient typically produces fairly high levels of IgG4. And this strategy takes advantage of that idea by saying that IgG4 could be produced against something like peanut to block allergic reactions very quickly after having this antibody injected. There's a few nonspecific approaches, and nonspecific again means that they should work equally well on any food allergy. One of those is a class of drugs called BTK inhibitors that have previously been used for malignancy and some other diseases in adults that have been shown actually to shut down allergic reactions pretty successfully. And there is a recent publication as well as an ongoing study right now looking at a BTK inhibitor for the treatment of peanut allergy. And then the last class that we'll focus on now is biologics. And biologics have led a revolution across medicine with the ability to treat many, many different diseases more successfully than had been the case in the past, whether that be rheumatoid arthritis or ulcerative colitis, or in this case, food allergy. So what are the potential advantages of using a biologic? And the first, and to me, the most important, is that they are not food specific. And when we looked at the reasons why the FDA-approved peanut OIT product has not been taken up very widely, one of the things that our patients told us is that I'm allergic to many things in addition to peanut. And actually, peanut is fairly easy to avoid compared to some of my other food allergies. So for all of these patients with multiple food allergies, there could be real advantage of this non-food specific approach. The intermittent dosing, while it requires ongoing dosing, it is far simpler for most people to be getting an injection or two every 2 or 4 weeks than it would be to be taking a daily dose of something like OIT or SLIT. Safety has been well documented, especially for omalizumab, which has now been approved for treatment of asthma for 20 years, so a long track record of reassuring safety information. Something that we don't think about automatically, but when we're sitting with a patient, it sure comes up, and that's control of comorbidities. And the vast majority of patients we see with food allergy do have other allergic issues, such as allergic rhinitis and asthma, both of which may also be ameliorated with the use of a biologic. The efficacy here is with a question mark, although we have lots of studies now, smaller studies, showing that the threshold that it takes to induce an allergic reaction can be changed significantly with omalizumab, and that when used with oral immunotherapy, you may be able to reduce some of the adverse effects. And as pediatricians, we're always excited about the idea of disease modification. It will take a long time to really gather that information, but if there was even the possibility that longer-term disease could be modified by using a biologic, it would make this approach even more exciting. Disadvantages, requirement for long-term use. Now, how's that different than the other treatments we've discussed? Not at all. All of these we expect are going to require long-term use. And like any allergy medicine, we believe that a biologic will only work while you're on it. Once you've stopped it, your allergy should return to its normal baseline. Dosing restrictions are important in that the biologics at this point have not been studied adequately in patients with very high total IgE levels. And there are many patients with food allergy who do have these high IgE levels who may actually not be able to experience the potential benefit of a biologic because of that laboratory marker. And lastly, costs. And all of the biologics for all of these diseases are very expensive. So it will be very important that as the studies are being done, that it's documented that there is actual benefit that warrants the cost. There are 2 biologics under active study right now. One of them is omalizumab, and we'll talk a minute now about a study that both Dr. Kim and I have been involved with, looking at omalizumab as a monotherapy or as an adjunctive therapy along with multi-food oral immunotherapy, and looking in this study at patients who are allergic to peanut and at least 2 other foods. And ligelizumab, another anti-IgE product, is now in a phase 3 trial looking at patients with peanut allergy. This is an old study, but it's actually very important, and it reminds me how long we've been waiting for bringing this kind of approach to actual practice. This is a study using a different anti-IgE product called TNX-901, showing that at the medium-high dose and the very high dose, there was a significant change, again, in the amount of peanut it took to induce a reaction, going from about 1/2 peanut to 9 peanuts. And unfortunately, this product was not taken forward for a variety of reasons. At the present time, omalizumab is being studied both as monotherapy and as an adjunct to multi-food OIT in a study called OUTMATCH, part of COFAR the Consortium for Food Allergy Research. This is a phase 3, 10-center randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study. The original intent was to enroll 225 participants, 1 to 55 years of age, all of whom need to be highly sensitive to peanut and at least 2 other foods that may include milk, egg, wheat, cashew, hazelnut, or walnut. Importantly, in 2018, the FDA granted breakthrough therapy designation for omalizumab for the treatment of food allergy, with the goal being approval for treatment of multiple food allergies or any food allergy. The current study status is that 481 participants have been enrolled and 180 have been randomized. Thankfully, the FDA allowed for an interim analysis such that we were able to stop randomization at 180 participants. 68 of those are age 5 and below, and we anticipate results for the primary endpoint quite soon, in fall of 2023, and believe that this study will really help to inform the optimal use of this treatment, as well as future anti-IgE medications and possibly other biologics, and how they play out in their treatment of food allergy. So we're sort of looking forward in the next 5, 7, 10, 15 years as emerging, evolving treatment paradigms for food allergy. The first I'm going to stress is we need to really think about individual patient goals. Patients can take the same food allergy and act very differently with the level of fear, anxiety, frequency of reactions, etc. That for some simple food allergy, simple in quotes, but there are patients with, say, just peanut allergy who handle that allergy very nicely, and they may prefer to just manage it with avoidance rather than using a long-term medication. But the treatment decisions will need to be based on shared decision-making with detailed discussions regarding what are the treatment approaches, what are their risks and benefits, what are some individual characteristics that may best inform the right treatment for the right patient, and those include age, reaction history, the likelihood that they may react to these small exposures, anxiety, effects of the disease and the treatment and quality of life, the specific food allergies, recognizing that some food allergies, like milk and egg, may lead to more frequent reactions because they are so hard to avoid. And then additional factors that may make avoidance more difficult, whether it be something as simple as being at college or something more complicated like international travel. And then we'll always come back to thinking about these comorbidities. And if a patient, has, let's say, relatively well-managed food allergy, but they have multiple food allergies, and now they have significant asthma and allergic rhinitis, a drug like omalizumab or ligelizumab may have an effect on the comorbidities as well as the food allergy. I'm going to come back just for a moment here, Edwin, and talk about the case that I presented. I'm going to mention 1 or 2 things, let you take it from there. But again, this was a 4-year-old, had had 1 reaction in the past. Remember that first reaction, he had some hives on the face. And something about this situation led them to be at a picnic, eating foods that may not have been fully vetted, without any medications with them. And a lot of this is this idea, well, he only reacted mildly first, so we're really not that worried. It doesn't seem like the real peanut allergy. Whereas, as Edwin explained, the previous reaction doesn't at all predict the next reaction. And obviously, they should have not eaten the cookie. They should have medicines with them. And when we sit in clinic with a family like this, we really just review, here we had an episode, and let's see what we learned from it. And we learn that peanut's not so easy to avoid in some circumstances, and that reactions can be really scary, even though you didn't think that they would be. Edwin, any other words of wisdom on this case?
Just again, I think the excitement that now there may be some options. So exactly as you mentioned, for many patients, avoidance still may be the right answer, and especially in cases where the diagnosis maybe is not so clear just yet. But then to know that there may be oral immunotherapy available now, but also other treatments that are coming down the pike that may be great options for patients. And also, again, this 4-year-old, there may be a right answer for the 4-year-old now, that when this child becomes 10 or becomes 18 or becomes 25, those discussions may be different. And so there may be a right treatment for a right patient at a right time that changes over time as well.
Yeah, great points, Edwin. So let me just end with our conclusions. Very clear how common food allergy is. that it can have major effects on quality of life, is associated with significant morbidity. Ideally, treatments will emerge that provide significant protection with acceptable risk and ease of use. At this point in time, biologics directed at the blockade of IgE come closest to meeting these goals, especially related to their safety profile, ease of use, apparent efficacy, non-food specific effects, and effects on comorbidities. So I want to remind you to check out the final session in this series entitled Defining the Place of Emerging IgE Targeted Therapies and Team-Based Management of Food Allergies. That is now available on immunologylive.com. Lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for participating. I'd like to thank Edwin for his excellent contribution for this presentation, and to thank Genentech for their generous support of this important educational activity. Another reminder to visit the event resources section of the player located under the video box to download today's presentation slides, as well as some resources you can share with your patients from the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America and FAIR. Please also remember to complete the post-test at the end of the session to secure your CME credit. Visit immunologylive.com to review today's session along with other sessions on demand. Again, this is Robert Wood, and thank you for joining us.